Miles clutched the strap of her oversized aviation jacket as she stepped onto Flight 217 at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. At 12 years old, she was smaller than most passengers, but the well-worn headset slung around her neck and the scuffed, leather-bound notebook she carried made her seem older than her age. She could feel the curious eyes of other passengers tracking her every movement, but it wasn't their attention she cared about. It was the mission ahead. Her hands fidgeted slightly as she adjusted the headset, sliding the padded cups over her ears, testing the microphone. She flipped open the notebook, scanning diagrams of avionics systems she had memorized months ago. Across the cabin, the teenagers in 7A had already noticed her. They were a group of friends, restless and loud, ready for a cross-country vacation to Washington, D.C. Their chatter quieted slightly as they studied. "Check out the little nerd," whispered one, nudging his friend. Another snickered, "Yeah, look at the giant headset. Think she's a pilot or something." Ignored them. She had learned long ago not to respond to mockery. Focus, she reminded herself. Focus. The flight attendants guided passengers into their seats and carefully stowed her small carry-on under the seat. She sat down beside the window, adjusted the headset again, and opened her notebook. The diagrams were intricate: F-22 avionics systems, flight control schematics, emergency protocols. She ran her finger along a diagram, rehearsing the steps for system reroutes in her head. Though it was just a commercial flight, she mentally prepared herself as though she were in the simulator at the Air National Guard training facility. The teens in 7A continued to whisper and laugh quietly, making snide comments about her oversized jacket and the notebook she treated like a sacred text. Lips pressed together. Ignore them. The plane began to taxi. The engine hummed beneath the cabin floor, a sound had always loved, the vibration, the controlled chaos of power. She imagined herself piloting an F-22, the controls under her fingers, the roar of the engines reverberating through her chest. That daydream was quickly interrupted when the plane lifted into the sky, the wheels leaving the tarmac with a familiar shudder. As the aircraft climbed, the teens in 7A leaned back, still whispering. "I bet she doesn't even know how a plane works," one said. Another snorted. "Probably just memorized some nerd stuff to look cool." Fully aware of their judgmental glances kept her gaze fixed on her notebook. She had heard this type of comment before, from classmates, strangers, adults. Mockery was a constant in her life, but she had learned to rise above it. She focused on her breathing, on her mental checklist for possible emergencies, and on the mission that awaited in Washington. The flight seemed routine until mid-air turbulence shook the cabin. Drinks sloshed, overhead bins rattled, and a collective murmur of concern rose among passengers. The teens in 7A immediately stiffened. One gripped the armrest. "What's going on?" someone asked, voice shaky. The plane's intercom crackled to life. The captain's calm but urgent voice addressed the cabin. "Ladies and we've experienced a partial electrical failure. We require assistance from anyone with technical or aeronautical experience. Please remain calm." The cabin fell silent. Whispers turned into gasps. Heart rate increased slightly, not with fear but with anticipation. This was the moment she had prepared for. She unzipped her jacket slightly, revealing a patch stitched neatly onto the inside. "Call sign, Vixen." It was subtle but unmistakable to anyone who knew military aviation. Flight attendants looked at each other, unsure. The teens in 7A stared wide-eyed, the laughter completely drained from their faces. The kid nerd was about to step forward in a way they could never imagine. Stood and approached the cockpit, her small figure moving with measured, deliberate confidence. Every eye in the cabin followed her. She tapped lightly on the cockpit door, which opened under the pilot's wary glance. "I can assist," she said, her voice steady. The pilots blinked, momentarily stunned, assessing the preteen in front of them. "Your ID, please," the captain asked. Produced her Department of Defense Youth Technical Liaison badge, letting it catch the light. The pilot's skepticism melted into curiosity and a grudging recognition of her expertise. The teens in 7A exchanged whispers. She's actually certified," one stammered. Another shook his head. No way, she can't be serious. Moved to the communications panel, scanning readings with practiced efficiency. She recognized the pattern of the electrical surge immediately, tracing it to the auxiliary avionics bus. The pilots murmured in disbelief. She explained the issue clearly, using terminology precise enough to impress the most seasoned engineers. The teens leaned forward in astonishment. The kid they had mocked was now guiding the plane through a potential emergency. Back in row 7A, the atmosphere shifted from mockery to awe. Its calm, authoritative presence contrasted sharply with their earlier whispers. For the first time, they realized that experience and skill could not be judged by age or appearance. Issued clear instructions to the pilots, suggesting reroutes for power and communication backups. Her fingers danced across switches she had only studied in simulators, but every movement was confident, precise. The plane's instrument slowly began to stabilize under her guidance. As the signs remained illuminated, glanced briefly at the teens. Their faces were pale, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and newfound respect. She didn't smile or gloat. Her focus remained entirely on the plane, the crew, and the passengers. Outside the window, clouds swirled, reflecting the sunlight in streaks of silver and gold. Took a deep breath. This was only the beginning. The turbulence was minor compared to what lay ahead. At that moment, two F-22 Raptors appeared in the distance, sleek and commanding. Didn't panic, she recognized them immediately. They were in formation, scanning the civilian plane. The teens in 7A gasped. One whispered, Is that real?" Calmly adjusted her headset, ready to communicate. The plane shuddered again slightly from minor turbulence, but she remained unshaken. Every motion, every decision was calculated and deliberate. The kid they mocked had already proven herself, and the F-22s had taken notice. The cabin atmosphere was electric with tension and disbelief. Passengers watched like she was a force beyond comprehension. The teens in 7A, once bold and mocking, sat silent, unable to speak. Opened her notebook once more, cross-referencing readings, then relayed a series of instructions to the cockpit, ensuring the plane remained stable. She didn't flinch as the intercom crackled with incoming signals from the Raptors. Her call sign, Vixen, was about to echo through the skis, and the world in row 7A would never forget the moment they witnessed a prodigy at work. The cabin of Flight 217 vibrated with a nervous energy. Miles remained calm, her small frame seated upright, hands clasping the edges of her leather-bound notebook. The teens in 7A were frozen in their seats, whispering to each other in disbelief. "She's actually going to help," one muttered under his breath. Didn't answer. She had no time for explanations. Her mind was already several steps ahead, calculating, anticipating, and coordinating. The plane's cockpit instruments flickered violently, warning lights illuminating the panel. The turbulence that had begun as a minor annoyance now hinted at a deeper electrical problem. The captain's voice resonated through the intercom, clipped and tense. "We're experiencing a partial avionics failure. I need someone familiar with aircraft systems to assist in assessing the issue." Murmurs of concern rippled through the cabin. The teens in 7A exchanged panicked glances. Stood calmly, her jacket sleeve revealing the embroidered call sign they hadn't noticed before. "Vixen." Flight attendants looked at each other in surprise, unsure whether to allow a 12-year-old access to the cockpit. Walked confidently down the aisle, notebook in hand, eyes focused on the task at hand. As she approached the cockpit, the pilots exchanged uncertain glances. "Do you have experience with military aircraft systems?" the captain asked, a mixture of skepticism and hope in his voice. Nodded firmly. "Yes, sir. I've trained with the Air National Guard on F-22 systems, including emergency protocols for electrical failures and communication reroutes." She handed over her Department of Defense Youth Technical Liaison badge, letting the light catch the metallic lettering. The pilot's expressions shifted from doubt to stunned recognition. The kid was no ordinary passenger. The teens in 7A sat frozen, mouths open. The mocking whispers they had shared hours ago were replaced by awe and disbelief. The girl they had ridiculed was now directly responsible for stabilizing the aircraft. quickly scanned the cockpit instruments, identifying the source of the electrical surge. She began issuing precise instructions to the pilots, explaining step by step how to bypass the affected avionics bus, reroute power, and establish a backup communication channel. Her voice was calm, authoritative, and unwavering, each word carrying the confidence of someone far older and far more experienced. As she worked, the turbulence intensified. Drinks spilled and the plane rocked violently. A few passengers gasped and gripped their seats but remained unaffected. The teens in 7A were glued to her every movement, their earlier bravado completely vanished. She adjusted switches, monitored instrument readings, and relayed critical data to the pilots, who followed her instructions meticulously. Every decision she made was calculated, precise, and deliberate. Within moments, the plane's system stabilized slightly, enough to reduce the immediate risk. Then through the cockpit radio, a new voice cut through the static. "Vixen, this is Raptor lead. Confirm status." Froze for a split second, recognizing the tone instantly. Her pulse didn't quicken, she had trained for moments like this, but the teens in 7A gasped audibly. The pilots looked at her in disbelief. The voice wasn't speaking to the captain. It was speaking to. She adjusted her headset and responded with military precision, relaying the plane's status and the corrective measures she had implemented. Outside the windows, two F-22 Raptors streaked across the sky, forming a protective formation around Flight 217. The sleek jets reflected the sunlight, their aerodynamic bodies a reminder of the power had trained to work with. The cabin was electric with tension. The teens in 7A stared in silence, awe etched across their faces. One whispered, barely audible, This is insane. She's actually talking to F-22 pilots." Didn't smile or celebrate. Her focus remained entirely on the task at hand, keeping the aircraft stable, ensuring communication, and coordinating with the Raptors above. Minutes passed like hours. Issued detailed instructions, guiding the pilots to engage backup systems and re-establish full control of the plane. She spoke calmly, her tone clipped yet soothing, each instruction concise and unambiguous. The crew followed her lead, impressed at the depth of her knowledge and the clarity of her commands. She referred to her notebook occasionally, double-checking protocols, but every movement was deliberate. The teens in 7A were now leaning forward in their seats, completely mesmerized. Every calculation, every flick of a switch, and every calm directive reinforced the shocking reality. The girl they mocked was saving their lives. The turbulence began to subside, but a new challenge emerged. Another electrical surge threatened the primary communication system, cutting off the cockpit from the cabin and the external air traffic controllers. Eyes narrowed as she assessed the instruments. "Switch to auxiliary frequency channel 3, she instructed, her voice steady. "Reroute power from the secondary bus and maintain communication with Raptor lead." The pilots executed her commands flawlessly. The F-22s adjusted formation, providing support and monitoring the civilian plane as it continued its precarious journey. The cabin remained tense, but the passengers had begun to trust, even if only subconsciously. The teens in 7A, who had spent the first hour laughing at her, now sat in silence, all replacing fear. One whispered, "I can't believe this. She's incredible." Another shook his head, muttering, "We were such idiots. I can't believe we laughed at her." Ignored the comments. She had no time for explanations, no time for vindication. Every second counted, and every instruction could make the difference between a safe landing and disaster. Through the cockpit window, the F-22s maintained formation, their presence a steadying influence. Coordinated with them flawlessly, using her training to relay critical updates, anticipate potential complications, and guide the civilian aircraft through turbulence and electrical instability. The teens in 7A watched silently, realizing that the kid they had mocked hours ago was now in command, not just of the situation, but of the respect of every professional. His focus never wavered, her calm authority undiminished by the chaos surrounding her. By the time the turbulence eased and the instruments stabilized, The teens in 7A had learned a lesson they would never forget. Mockery, arrogance, and assumptions about age or appearance had no bearing on skill, intelligence, or courage, had turned their whispers into silence, their disbelief into respect. Flight 217 was now under control, but the adventure was far from over. The F-22s remained nearby, and its call sign, Vixen, echoed through the secure communication channels. As the aircraft leveled at cruising altitude, sat back for a brief moment, scanning the cabin. The passengers had begun to relax slightly, reassured by the calm authority she had projected. The teens in 7A stared at her in silence, their earlier mockery replaced by awe and humility. Flipped open her notebook again, reviewing potential contingencies for the remainder of the flight. Outside, the sun glinted off the wings of the protective F-22s. The kid they mocked had become a lifeline, and the story of Flight 217 was only just beginning. Sat upright in the cockpit, eyes scanning the instruments, her hands poised above switches with the precision of someone who had spent countless hours in simulators and military training programs. The hum of Flight 217's engines vibrated through the cabin, a constant reminder of the delicate balance she was maintaining. Outside, the two F-22 Raptors glinted in the sunlight, their sleek, angular bodies cutting through clouds like predator jets on patrol. Their presence was reassuring, yet it added a weight of responsibility. Knew the jets weren't just there for show. They were prepared to intervene if she made even the smallest miscalculation. The teens in 7A had pressed their faces against the windows, mouths agape, whispering among themselves. "I can't believe they're real," one breathed. Another muttered, "And they're following her orders." The realization hit them slowly. The girl they had mocked, teased, and dismissed as a nerd was now recognized and relied upon by elite fighter pilots. Each F-22 maneuver outside the plane mirrored calculations, maintaining formation with precision that only someone who truly understood air combat dynamics could command. "Vixen, confirm altitude and heading," crackled the secure communication channel. The voice was calm, professional, almost imperious. His fingers flew over the backup communication panel, relaying readings and adjustments with concise authority. "Altitude stable at 30,000 feet. Heading 270. Electrical reroute complete. All critical systems nominal," she replied. The pilots exchanged glances, both relieved and astonished. Had anticipated the surge patterns almost instinctively, and her instructions to the F-22s were flawless. Outside, the Raptors adjusted formation, flanking Flight 217 with synchronized precision. The cabin of the commercial plane was tense. Passengers gripped their seats, eyes darting between the flitting shadows of the jets outside the windows, and who remained calm as if the chaos around her were routine. The teens in 7A, once loud and mocking, now sat frozen, their earlier bravado erased. She's actually controlling them," one whispered, disbelief laced in every syllable. Another added, I can't even imagine how she knows what to do." Heard them but didn't look at them. Her focus remained entirely on stabilizing the flight and coordinating with the F-22s. Then the plane shuddered violently as a sudden, sharper turbulence struck. The overhead bins rattled, drinks sloshed, and a murmur of panic moved through the cabin. The cockpit alarms flared, signaling a secondary electrical surge. His pulse quickened slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline that came with a true test of skill. She had trained for worst-case scenarios, but every real-life emergency demanded adaptability beyond theory. "Raptor lead, anticipate potential loss of auxiliary power. Maintain visual formation," she instructed, her tone clipped and authoritative. The pilots of Flight 217 executed her commands with precision, but's mind was already calculating contingencies. If the secondary surge damaged the communications further, she needed to establish a new protocol, reroute critical avionics, and maintain manual control. Her fingers moved over switches, toggling systems she had memorized by heart, each click measured, deliberate, and precise. Outside, the F-22s adjusted instantaneously to her guidance, banking and leveling in response to her commands. The teens in 7A watched, mouths agape, realizing they had witnessed something extraordinary. One of the Raptors executed a sharp maneuver, signaling a potential hazard below the cloud cover. Quickly scanned her instruments and confirmed the risk, a patch of severe atmospheric turbulence. She issued commands to the pilots. Adjust altitude by 200 feet, maintain heading. Compensate for wind shear. Raptor lead, acknowledge change. The fighter jets shifted formation, protecting the civilian plane while allowing it to ascend smoothly above the turbulent layer. His mind was a blur of calculations, yet every action was calm and controlled. The teens in 7A whispered among themselves, the awe in their voices replacing fear. I can't believe she's 12, one breathed. Another shook his head. She's like actually a pilot. The other passengers watched silently, some gripping their armrests, some praying, all transfixed by the remarkable calm of Miles. The cabin, which had moments ago been filled with nervous murmurs, now fell into a hushed reverence. Remained a beacon of focus amid chaos, a commanding presence no one had anticipated. Minutes passed, and the turbulence began to lessen, but a new threat emerged. A series of electrical spikes threatened to knock out the cockpit's primary navigation instruments entirely. Eyes narrowed. She adjusted the backup frequency, rerouted power from the secondary bus, and stabilized the auxiliary instruments. The F-22s mirrored her adjustments in real time, banking and flanking Flight 217 like guardians of the sky. Outside, the sun glinted off their fuselages, casting long, sharp shadows across the clouds below. The teens in 7A watched in awe, speechless. "You're exceeding expected parameters," the Raptor lead crackled, responded without hesitation, acknowledged, prioritizing stabilization and communications. All passengers accounted for, systems nominal within tolerances, maintaining formation. The pilots of Flight 217 whispered to each other, astonished. They had dealt with emergencies before, but never like this. The calm efficiency, the foresight, the command authority, it belonged to someone decades older, not a preteen girl. The teens stared at, suddenly aware of how entirely wrong their assumptions had been. The turbulence finally eased entirely, though the plane remained under careful monitoring. Issued final adjustments to ensure smooth flight toward Washington, D.C., the F-22s continued to flank the plane, a protective screen visible through the windows. The teens in 7A remained quiet, humbled. Their earlier laughter had been replaced by stunned silence and respect, did not gloat or seek recognition. She focused on the instruments, double-checking her reroutes and preparing for the final phase of the flight. Every movement was deliberate, every decision precise. She was calm, collected, and in command. Finally, as the plane leveled at cruising altitude and communications stabilized fully, allowed herself a brief glance at the cabin. Passengers watched her with newfound admiration. The teens in 7A whispered, she saved us." Another added, "We were awful. I can't believe we laughed at her." Acknowledged them briefly with a nod but returned to her instruments. The flight was far from over, but she had earned the trust of everyone on board, including the elite F-22 pilots circling protectively above. For the first time in her life, fully realized the impact of her training. Every drill, every simulation, every late-night study session had led to this moment. She had proven that age was no measure of skill, and that mockery was powerless against preparation and courage. The teens in 7A, the passengers, and even the crew now recognized her authority, though she had done nothing to seek their approval. Was focused, calm, and ready for whatever the next challenge of Flight 217 would bring. Eyes darted between the cockpit instruments and the looming shape of the F-22s outside the window. The jets glinted like silver predators in the sunlight, their angular wings cutting through the clouds. One of the Raptors banked slightly, signaling an adjustment, and immediately understood. These weren't casual escorts. They were expecting her to coordinate. She adjusted her headset, flipping switches to maintain a secure connection. "Raptor lead, this is Vixen. Confirm visual and status," she said clearly, her tone calm and commanding. The secure line crackled before the voice of the F-22 lead returned. Vixen, the civilian aircraft, has experienced multiple electrical surges. Systems are stable but under strict monitoring. Recommend altitude adjustment and heading correction. Are you in full control? Didn't hesitate. Affirmative. Stabilization procedures complete. Systems fully operational. Ready to implement altitude correction. Coordinating with your formation. The F-22s adjusted almost instantly, their sleek frames moving with lethal precision, flanking Flight 217 on both sides. The teens in 7A pressed against the windows, wide-eyed and speechless. Inside the cockpit, the commercial pilots followed every instruction. She guided them through manual adjustments that required deft hands and perfect timing. Each switch, each lever, and every subtle instrument tweak was calculated for maximum efficiency. Increase pitch by 2 degrees, maintain heading, and compensate for lateral drift, she instructed. The pilots murmured in awe as the plane responded exactly as predicted. Outside, the F-22s mirrored the maneuvers perfectly, banking and adjusting to shield the aircraft from potential turbulence and atmospheric inconsistencies. The teens could hardly breathe. The girl they had mocked, the kid nerd with oversized jacket and headset, was now in command. She wasn't just assisting, she was orchestrating. One whispered, I think she's actually controlling them. Another nodded mutely, unable to form words. The cabin had gone silent. Passengers' previous murmurs of fear had shifted into quiet admiration. Every subtle change in flight trajectory, every precise adjustment, reminded them that was more than capable. She was extraordinary. A sharp alarm suddenly sounded in the cockpit. Another electrical spike, more aggressive than the last, flickered across the panels. The backup systems were stable but recognized the severity immediately. Raptor lead, anticipate possible auxiliary failure. Maintain protective formation. Initiating secondary reroute now. Her fingers flew over the switches, her movements confident and exact. The pilots executed her commands perfectly, trusting her expertise implicitly. The F-22s mirrored her instructions, banking and adjusting to account for the plane's micro-movements, creating a fluid protective barrier. Her mind raced as she anticipated the next challenge. The electrical surges were irregular, sporadic, but predictable enough to mitigate. She calculated contingencies for each potential scenario: instrument loss, autopilot failure, communication disruption. Each calculation was instantaneous, each decision deliberate. Auxiliary power stable, redundant channels active, continuing monitoring, she reported. The F-22 lead acknowledged her words, confirming their coordinated flight pattern. The teens in 7A could only gape. They had mocked her not 10 minutes ago, and now she was commanding elite fighter pilots in a life-or-death scenario. Suddenly, one of the Raptors signaled a warning, a visual flare indicating a nearby storm front moving in unexpectedly. Scanned the instruments. She adjusted altitude and heading, calculating wind vectors and potential turbulence. Raptor lead, minor storm system approaching. Recommend minor altitude adjustment plus 200 feet. Compensate for lateral drift. All instruments nominal, she instructed. The F-22s banked, creating a protective wall above and below, while Flight 217 smoothly shifted course under command. The cabin was tense, but the passengers felt a cautious reassurance from her calm demeanor. The teens whispered again, all replacing their previous disdain. I can't believe she's doing this, one said. Another muttered, she's literally running this flight. Gaze didn't waver. Her mind was fully immersed in the calculations, monitoring every panel, every instrument, and every external variable. The commercial pilots, initially skeptical, now followed her lead without question. Each adjustment she suggested worked flawlessly, stabilizing the aircraft in conditions that would have challenged even veteran aviators. The plane jolted slightly as a minor wind shear hit. Fingers flew over the backup frequency panels, ensuring secure communication with the F-22s while instructing the pilots on minute throttle and flap adjustments. Throttle 60%, adjust flaps 3 degrees, maintain heading 270. Confirm visual on storm front, she said, her voice calm yet commanding. The pilots instantly. The turbulence diminished almost immediately. The F-22s held formation, their precision movements reflecting the skill and authority projected from her small frame. Glanced briefly at the teens in 7A, their faces were pale, eyes wide and mouths slightly agape. They had never seen anyone like her, not a person, not a prodigy, not even an adult. The kid they had mocked was now controlling the flow of air traffic around them, coordinating with fighter jets and keeping everyone alive. She did not smile or celebrate. Focus, she reminded herself. Every second mattered, and one wrong move could undo all her careful planning. Minutes passed as Flight 217 leveled out above the storm front. Maintained communication with the F-22s, coordinating minor course adjustments to ensure the aircraft remained in safe airspace. Maintain formation. Keep visual with civilian aircraft. Systems nominal. Preparing for descent briefing, she instructed. The jets banked, creating a protective corridor as the plane approached Washington, D.C. The teens in 7A whispered once more, humbled. We were awful, one admitted, another nodded. I can't believe we laughed at her. Did not respond, her mind already shifting to the next challenge, preparing for the descent. The passengers were tense but reassured by confidence. The cockpit instruments were stable, communications were secure, and the F-22s maintained their protective positions. Calculated calm had turned panic into cautious optimism. The teens in 7A, once so certain of her incompetence, now watched silently, absorbing the lesson that courage, skill, and knowledge were far more powerful than age or appearance. As the sun began to set, glinting off the wings of the protective jets, prepared the flight crew for the next stage. Descent and landing in Washington, the final critical phase. His heart raced, not with fear but with determination. She had been tested and she had passed. The F-22s were in formation. The pilots trusted her implicitly. The teens had witnessed firsthand the power of preparation and skill. She would need all her training for the descent, but for now she allowed herself a brief mental acknowledgement of the calm she had instilled, the trust she had earned, and the awe she had inspired. The kid in 7A was no longer a joke. She was Vixen, a prodigy commanding the sky. The cockpit of Flight 217 was tense. Alarms occasionally blinked, though it stabilized most critical systems. Yet the secondary electrical surges were unpredictable, and one mistake could cascade into disaster. Her fingers flew over switches, toggling between primary and auxiliary channels, rerouting power and recalibrating navigation instruments. Every flick of a switch was precise, deliberate, and measured. The pilots followed her instructions without question, their trust absolute. Outside, the two F-22 Raptors mirrored her adjustments, banking in near-perfect formation, flanking the civilian aircraft like guardians of the sky. The teens in 7A were glued to their windows, eyes wide with disbelief. One of the Raptors signaled a warning, visual markers flashing along the cockpit display. A sudden pocket of severe wind shear was approaching, far more intense than anything the flight crew had anticipated. Eyes narrowed. She immediately calculated the vector, factoring in airspeed, current altitude, and the plane's limited maneuverability. Throttle to 65%. Adjust flaps 3 degrees. Initiate minor pitch correction 2 degrees. Maintain heading 270, she instructed, her voice calm yet commanding. The pilots executed every move precisely, trusting her calculations implicitly. The plane responded perfectly, cutting through the turbulence with minimal strain. The teens in 7A could hardly breathe. They had been mocking her only an hour earlier, teasing the oversized jacket and headset. Now every whisper and giggle was gone, replaced by awe. I can't believe she's actually doing this, one whispered. Another nodded. She's literally controlling the plane and the jets. Ignored the whispers, fully focused on the instruments. One wrong calculation could trigger a cascade of failures, loss of navigation, communications, or even lift in the turbulent storm ahead. She remained calm, every breath controlled, every movement deliberate. Suddenly, another electrical spike hit, flickering through the primary instruments. The autopilot disengaged automatically but was prepared. Manual control engaged. System stable. Raptor lead maintain formation. Compensate for wind shear manually, she commanded. The pilots leaned forward, eyes wide as she guided the plane through the spike. Outside, the Raptors banked sharply, shielding the civilian aircraft. The teens' faces were pale, hands gripping the armrests, jaws tight. Calm, precise authority was the only thing keeping Flight 217 on course. Altitude dropping slightly, need immediate correction, the captain muttered, assessed the instruments. She calculated a compensatory pitch increase balanced with subtle throttle adjustment. Increase pitch 3 degrees, throttle 70%, maintain heading, compensate for lateral drift, she instructed. The plane responded immediately, regaining altitude. The cockpit crew exchanged astonished glances. "I've never seen anyone handle this so flawlessly," the first officer admitted. Didn't respond. Focus, she reminded herself. Focus on stabilization, on communication, on the safety of the passengers. Outside the windows, the F-22s moved with uncanny precision, banking and adjusting in tandem with directions. They provided a buffer between the civilian aircraft and the turbulent air currents, a living shield in the sky. The teens in 7A whispered again, all laced with fear. I feel like we're watching a military operation," one said. Another nodded mutely. "And she's running it." Did not flinch. She was accustomed to operating under extreme pressure. This was her training manifesting in real life, and lives depended on her every decision. A minor storm cell approached rapidly, clouds darkening overhead. Scanned the instruments, calculated wind speed, and adjusted course and altitude preemptively. Raptor lead, anticipate turbulence, maintain altitude, and compensate for lateral drift. Civilian aircraft stable, she instructed. The F-22s responded instantly, shifting positions, flanking the plane from all sides. The cabin shook slightly as the turbulence hit, but calm, precise instructions ensured minimal disruption. The teens in 7A watched in stunned silence, realizing the girl they had mocked had become the linchpin of everyone's survival. The plane jolted again. A surge threatened the auxiliary communication system. Hands moved with fluid precision, rerouting channels and establishing a temporary secure link with the F-22s. Backup channels active, manual override engaged. Civilian aircraft stable, she said. The pilots executed her commands flawlessly. Outside, the Raptors maintained a protective formation, their positions shifting to accommodate the sudden gusts of wind. The teens could barely process what was happening. Every command issued was precise, every adjustment flawless. They had mocked her intelligence and experience, and now she was their guardian in the sky. Time seemed to stretch as coordinated every aspect of the emergency. She calculated descent rates, monitored instrument readings, and maintained a constant line of communication with the F-22s. The cockpit was tense, but the commercial pilots had full confidence in her decisions. "Vixen, do you want us to continue manual corrections or prepare for full handover?" the captain asked. Didn't hesitate. "Maintain manual assistance. I will guide descent and landing protocols." Auxiliary systems nominal. Raptor lead, maintain visual and protective formation. The storm intensified slightly and the plane shuddered violently. Drinks spilled, passengers gripped their seats and some let out audible gasps. The teens in 7A were frozen in fear. Adjusted flaps, pitch, and throttle simultaneously, keeping the aircraft level while calculating descent for Washington, D.C. Her headset crackled as the F-22 lead responded. "Acknowledged, Vixen. Formation stable. Monitoring instruments closely. Ready for descent guidance." The jets moved as one, creating a protective corridor. Calm authority radiated through the cabin. Finally, the instruments stabilized, the turbulence eased, and the plane leveled at cruising altitude. took a deep breath but remained vigilant. The descent was coming, and that phase would be even more critical. The teens in 7A, once mocking and dismissive, now sat silently, eyes wide, processing the extraordinary events. Passengers whispered among themselves, glancing at with admiration. For the first time, the girl they had mocked was their lifeline, a prodigy commanding elite fighter jets, managing a commercial aircraft, and keeping everyone alive. His mind was already shifting to the descent. She calculated approach vectors, wind corrections, and speed adjustments. The F-22s would guide her, but she would need to maintain complete command of the aircraft. The teens in 7A finally looked at each other, pale and humbled. They had learned the hardest lesson imaginable: never underestimate someone based on age, appearance, or perceived experience. Vixen had transformed from mocked kid to the unchallenged authority in the sky. The sun was beginning to dip behind clouds, casting long shadows across the fuselage of the aircraft. Eyes scanned every dial, every switch, every indicator, anticipating the challenges of the descent. The F-22s held formation, their sleek frames reflecting sunlight, a constant reminder that training and precision had earned their trust. The teens whispered, she's incredible." Another added, "We were awful to her." Didn't respond. She had no time for recognition. She had a plane to land, lives to protect, and a mission to complete. The sun was low on the horizon, casting streaks of gold across the fuselage of Flight 217. Miles' eyes were fixed on the cockpit instruments, scanning each dial, each gauge, each flicker of light. The commercial pilots glanced at her, trust fully in her guidance. "We're ready for descent, Vixen," the captain said. Nodded. Every calculation, every contingency she had rehearsed countless times in simulations now had to work flawlessly in real life. Outside, the F-22 Raptors glinted like metallic guardians, banking in precise formation to shield the aircraft from wind and turbulence. Took a deep breath. Engage manual descent protocol, adjust flaps to 6 degrees, throttle to 50%, maintain heading 270, monitor airspeed. Her voice was calm, deliberate, and commanding. The pilots followed her instructions to the letter. The teens in 7A, once mocking, now sat frozen, gripping their armrests with wide eyes. "She's controlling everything," one whispered. Another muttered, "I can't believe she's 12. Didn't answer. Every ounce of focus was required to safely navigate the plane through the turbulent descent. The first gust hit, a sudden surge of wind from the approaching storm front. The plane jolted violently. His fingers danced over the auxiliary panels, stabilizing instruments and rerouting power. Raptor lead, adjust formation. Protect left wing from wind shear. Maintain visual on civilian aircraft. Descent nominal, she instructed. The F-22s banked sharply, shifting their positions with deadly precision, forming a protective corridor above and below. The commercial plane leveled, responding to subtle corrections. The teens whispered again, all replacing fear. They had been mocking her not even 2 hours ago, and now she was saving their lives. As the aircraft descended further, the runway at Washington National Airport came into view, glinting under the setting sun. Calculated wind velocity, angle of descent, and speed adjustments, anticipating turbulence pockets along the approach path. Flaps 8 degrees. Gear down. Reduce throttle slightly. Maintain heading. Raptor lead, assist with final approach corridor, she instructed. The pilots instantly impressed by her clarity and precision. The plane's descent became smoother, despite occasional turbulence, and the F-22s formed a perfect protective wedge around them. The teens in 7A were silent, witnessing a prodigy orchestrating what could have been a catastrophe. Suddenly, another electrical surge flickered through the auxiliary systems, threatening the instruments she relied on. Eyes narrowed. Manual override engaged, rerouting critical instruments. Maintain visual alignment with runway. Monitor altitude continuously, she directed. Her fingers moved with practiced precision, toggling switches to stabilize readings. The F-22s adjusted formation instantly, compensating for minor shifts in Flight 217's trajectory. The pilots murmured in awe. "I've never seen anything like this," muttered the first officer. "Didn't respond. Focus. Every action, every second counted. A single miscalculation could turn this landing into disaster." The teens in 7A leaned forward, their earlier arrogance completely vanished. One whispered to another, I can't even imagine being that confident at 12. Another nodded. She's amazing. We were idiots." Kept her gaze on the instruments, ignoring the comments. She had a plane to land. Every instrument reading, every turbulence effect, every adjustment of speed and flaps was a calculation she performed instinctively. The F-22s, protective formation gave her a slight margin, but she knew ultimate responsibility lay in her hands. The runway lights grew larger, the approach path clearer. Coordinated with the pilots and F-22 lead. Reduce throttle to 45%. Maintain glide slope 3 degrees. Align with runway centerline. Raptor lead, provide visual guidance for final approach, she instructed. The jets adjusted slightly, flanking the plane perfectly. Inside, passengers held their breath. The teens in 7A could hardly watch, wide-eyed, their earlier mockery replaced by utter humility. Small frame had assumed the authority of a seasoned commander, and every action reflected years of discipline and study. The wind shifted unexpectedly, pushing the plane slightly off course. Hands flew over controls, subtly adjusting throttle, flaps, and pitch to maintain the glide slope. Correcting lateral drift. Maintain heading 270. Descent stable, she announced. The pilots followed her adjustments perfectly. Outside, the F-22s mirrored her moves, banking sharply to compensate. The teens whispered again, amazed. "She's literally flying the plane while the jets cover it," one said. Focus never wavered. The only thing that mattered was the safety of every soul aboard Flight 217. A sudden alarm indicated a minor hydraulic pressure fluctuation in the landing gear. Eyes flicked to the gauge, then to her backup instructions. Manual deployment confirmed. Flaps at 10 degrees, gear down and locked. Confirmed visually, she instructed. The pilots and confirmed the landing gear was secured. The teens in 7A gasped audibly. "She thought of everything," one whispered. Didn't answer. She was already recalculating descent speed and angle, ensuring alignment with the runway. The F-22s maintained their protective wedge, their shadows racing across the ground as Flight 217 approached the final stretch. The plane touched down, wheels kissing the runway with remarkable precision. A slight bump corrected immediately by subtle adjustments, and the aircraft rolled smoothly along the tarmac. Passengers exhaled collectively, some tearing up, some applauding. The teens in 7A looked at each other, pale and shaken, whispering, We were horrible to her." Allowed herself the briefest smile but remained focused, guiding the plane toward the taxiway. The F-22s banked away gracefully, signaling the end of their protective escort. The cabin erupted in applause as the plane slowed. Flight attendants thanked quietly, awe evident in their voices. The commercial pilots approached her, shaking her small hands. "You handled that flawlessly," the captain said. "We've never seen anyone with that level of control, especially at your age." Nodded, allowing herself a moment of pride but remaining humble. Outside, the sun dipped fully behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the airport. The teens in 7A finally approached her, faces pale and contrite. One whispered, "We were so sorry. We mocked you and it was wrong." Another added, You saved everyone. We were idiots." Looked at them, nodding slightly. "It's okay. Just remember, never underestimate someone based on age, size, or appearance," she said gently. Outside, the F-22 pilots gave a final salute before returning to their base. The sun dipped fully, leaving Flight 217 bathed in soft twilight. The kid they mocked had executed a perfect landing, coordinating military jets, a commercial aircraft, and dozens of lives with unmatched precision. The sun had fully set over Washington National Airport, casting the tarmac in a warm glow as emergency crews and airport personnel approached Flight 217. Passengers were shaken but unharmed, and the pilots thanked repeatedly. Word of the extraordinary landing had already begun spreading through the airport. The teens from 7A, who had once mocked her relentlessly, followed her cautiously, their earlier arrogance replaced by a mix of awe and guilt. Walked with quiet confidence, her headset still hanging loosely around her neck, her notebook tucked under her arm. "Thank you for saving us," one of the teens finally said, voice trembling. Another nodded, adding, We were so wrong about you. You were incredible." Looked at them, her expression calm and composed. "Just remember what you've learned," she said gently. "Never underestimate anyone based on age, appearance, or size. Courage and skill matter far more." The teens nodded solemnly, shame and admiration warring across their faces. For the first time, they truly saw the girl they had mocked as a leader, a hero, and a prodigy. Outside the terminal, news crews were already gathering. Airport security had quickly reporters after receiving calls from passengers. Cameras flashed as stepped out of Flight 217, the small figure at the center of a story that would soon capture national attention. Reporters shouted questions, trying to grasp the magnitude of what had occurred. Didn't panic. She answered clearly, concisely, and calmly. Flight 217 experienced multiple electrical surges during cruise. I assisted the pilots with stabilization and coordinated with nearby Air National Guard F-22s for protective support, she explained. The reporters were stunned. Many had assumed she was just a child passenger. Instead, they were witnessing a 12-year-old commanding authority in life-and-death circumstances. Social media erupted almost instantly. Videos of calm demeanor and precise instructions, captured on cabin phones and air traffic feeds, began going viral. Headlines read, "12-year-old prodigy coordinates emergency flight, Flight 217 saved by young Air Force ace, and from classroom mockery to national hero." Had gone from a kid in 7A to a nationwide symbol of courage and intellect. Meanwhile, the teens who had mocked her struggled to comprehend the attention she was receiving. One whispered, "I can't believe this, we laughed at her just this morning." Another added, "And now the whole country is talking about her. We feel awful." Overheard them but remained composed, focusing on helping passengers disembark safely. The transformation was stark. The once dismissive teenagers now treated her with respect, even reverence. They had learned firsthand that bravery and knowledge often defy expectations. Airport personnel guided toward a debriefing area, where officials from the Federal Aviation Administration, the Air National Guard, and Flight 217's airline were waiting. They praised her calm and precise coordination, her ability to communicate effectively with elite fighter pilots, and her instinctive problem-solving under extreme pressure. Explained each decision, each adjustment, and each calculated maneuver with clarity. The officials nodded, impressed by her technical acumen and level. Some admitted, almost sheepishly, that they had initially underestimated her because of her age. Soon, local news cameras followed, capturing her first public interview. She spoke with humility and poise, explaining how her training with the Air National Guard and years of aviation simulations had prepared her for high-pressure scenarios. "I just focused on the instruments, the pilots, and the F-22s, she said calmly. "My priority was keeping everyone safe." The footage went viral within hours. Across social media, news networks, and aviation forums, story spread like wildfire. Millions of viewers were captivated by the calm authority and bravery of a 12-year-old girl who had saved a plane full of lives. Back at the airport terminal, the teens from 7A finally approached her. They stood awkwardly, glancing at each other before one spoke. "I mean, Vixen, we're sorry. We mocked you and it was wrong. You're incredible." Another added, "We didn't realize, we thought we knew everything, but you're amazing." Looked at them quietly, a small, approving nod acknowledging their apology. "It's okay. Just remember this, courage and knowledge matter more than appearances. Let this be a lesson," she said gently. Their eyes widened in understanding. For the first time, they truly saw her not as a peer, but as a hero. The pilots of Flight 217 approached, shaking her hand and thanking her again. "You saved everyone aboard," the captain said. I've flown for decades and I've never seen such calm, precise coordination, especially from someone so young. Nodded modestly. It was teamwork, she said. The pilots, the F-22s, and the passengers staying calm all made a difference. Her humility impressed everyone present. Despite her unprecedented heroism, she remained focused, composed, and grounded, a true prodigy in every sense. Later that evening, returned home, exhausted but proud. The story of Flight 217 had gone viral, her call sign Vixen trending across social media, and news networks highlighting her bravery. Parents, teachers, and strangers across the country praised her courage and intellect. Messages of admiration poured in, and she realized that her actions had inspired millions. The teens from 7A, once dismissive, now shared the story proudly with classmates and friends, recounting every moment of her incredible skill. They had witnessed firsthand that mockery and assumptions could never diminish true talent. Even the Air National Guard recognized her extraordinary ability. The F-22 pilots had submitted reports praising her situational awareness, calm under pressure, and precise coordination. Military officials noted that it was rare for someone her age to demonstrate such technical expertise and authority. Parents, quietly proud, realized that their daughter had not only saved lives, but also captured the admiration and respect of an entire nation. The girl who had been mocked was now celebrated as a symbol of courage, intelligence, and determination. As the night settled in, reflected quietly on the day's events. The turbulence, electrical surges, and storm had tested every skill she had ever learned. She had commanded elite fighter jets, stabilized a commercial aircraft, and earned the respect of passengers, pilots, and national authorities alike. The teens from 7A had learned the hardest lesson imaginable: never judge someone based on age, appearance, or perceived capability. And she had proven beyond doubt that courage, preparation, and intelligence could overcome even the most impossible odds. The morning after the Flight 217 landing, Washington National Airport buzzed with news crews, photographers, and social media reporters capturing the story of Miles, the 12-year-old prodigy who had saved a plane full of passengers. Her calm precision, technical brilliance, and bravery had captured the nation's attention. Parents, students, and professionals alike shared clips of her coordinating with F-22 jets, managing a commercial aircraft through turbulence, and commanding respect from veteran pilots. Call sign Vixen had become a household name overnight, yet she remained remarkably grounded, carrying herself with quiet confidence rather than the arrogance one might expect from a national hero. The teens from 7A who had spent the previous day mocking her now approached her quietly at school. Their earlier laughter and whispers were replaced with hesitation and admiration. "We just wanted to say we're sorry," one said, voice shaking. "We didn't believe in you and we were awful." Another added, "You saved lives, you're amazing, we were wrong." Looked at them, nodding slightly. "Thank you, just remember what you've learned," she said gently. Courage, skill, and knowledge matter far more than age, size, or appearances. Don't let assumptions cloud your judgment. The teens nodded, humbled, and the lesson etched itself into their memory forever. At school, word of heroism spread quickly. Teachers praised her calm, precise thinking, and classmates crowded to hear her story. Some asked for details about her training, others simply marveled at her bravery. Explained in simple terms, careful to highlight teamwork over individual heroism. "The pilots, the F-22s, and the passengers all played a role," she said. "No one can act alone in a crisis like that. Everyone working together made the difference." Her humility shone through, and her classmates began to see her not as a distant prodigy, but as someone whose intelligence and courage could inspire them all. Meanwhile, the airline formally recognized her contribution. Flight 217's captain wrote a detailed commendation, praising her calm authority, technical precision, and situational awareness. The FAA sent official letters acknowledging her guidance during the emergency, highlighting her unique ability to communicate complex instructions under extreme pressure. The Air National Guard issued a statement lauding her training and skill, noting that it was rare for someone of her age to demonstrate such competence and presence of mind. His parents beamed quietly at her accomplishments, proud but never overbearing, letting her humility guide her through the whirlwind of attention. National media outlets clamored for interviews, seeking the story behind Vixen, yet remained composed. In front of cameras, she spoke softly and clearly. "I trained for situations like this," she explained. "I studied aircraft systems, emergency procedures, and communication protocols. But the truth is, I wasn't alone. Flight 217's crew, the passengers, and the F-22 pilots all worked together. Courage and preparation matter, and teamwork saves lives." Her words resonated across the country, inspiring other young people to pursue their passions, to study diligently, and to never underestimate themselves or anyone else. The teens from 7A continued to grapple with their earlier behavior. They had learned a humbling lesson. Underestimating someone based on superficial traits could have disastrous consequences. One whispered to another, "We laughed at her, and she saved all of us. We were idiots." Another added, "We need to remember this always." Overheard them but didn't respond. The lesson had been learned, and witnessing her calm authority and expertise had left an impression that would last a lifetime. The mockery and arrogance that had defined their morning had evaporated in the wake of heroism. In the following weeks, was invited to speak at aviation clubs, schools, and youth leadership programs. Her story was not just about bravery in the air. It became a symbol of preparation, intelligence, and humility on the ground. Teachers used her example to teach students about responsibility, focus, and teamwork. Aviation instructors cited her calm control as a model for emergency training. Social media campaigns highlighted her accomplishments, not as a fleeting viral story, but as a lasting lesson in courage and skill. Had become more than a national hero, she was a role model, inspiring confidence and resilience in others. Despite the attention, remained grounded. She continued attending school, helping classmates with projects and training with the Air National Guard. Her schedule was demanding, but she balanced her responsibilities with quiet determination. Each time she looked back on Flight 217, she remembered the turbulence, the electrical surges, and the challenge of coordinating with F-22 pilots. But she also remembered the teamwork, the trust, and the knowledge that preparation and focus could overcome fear. She carried those lessons with her, shaping not only her future but the attitudes of everyone who had witnessed her courage. Months later, the teens from 7A approached again, this time with admiration rather than apology. "We've been telling everyone your story," one said. "You taught us more than we realized." Another added, "You showed us what it means to be brave and smart, and to take responsibility when it matters most." Smiled faintly, nodding. "The most important thing is to respect everyone's abilities, no matter who they are. Courage can come from anyone, and preparation makes it real. Remember that." The teens nodded, humbled and inspired, forever changed by the experience. Flight 217's story became a case study in aviation schools, leadership programs, and even psychological studies on crisis management. Calm under pressure, her intelligence and her humility became the blueprint for effective emergency leadership. Her call sign, Vixen, entered aviation lore, symbolizing not just technical skill, but courage, composure, and respect earned through action. The girl who had been mocked in 7A had become a national symbol, a reminder that bravery, skill, and humility know no age. Years later, would recall Flight 217 not as a moment of fame, but as a lesson in courage, responsibility, and the power of preparation. She would remember the teens from 7A, the passengers, the pilots, and the F-22s as collaborators in a life-saving mission. The mockery of the past had been replaced with admiration, respect, and inspiration. And while the headlines had called her a prodigy, a hero, and a national sensation, quietly understood the truth. Heroes are defined not by recognition, but by action, humility, and the courage to step up when it matters most. The legacy of Vixen endured, not in the fleeting news stories, but in the lessons learned by everyone she touched. That bravery and skill are not defined by age, that mockery is powerless against preparation, and that true heroes inspire respect through action, not words. Miles, the girl once mocked in 7A, had shown the world that courage, intelligence, and humility could change everything.